Norberto raised his hand, asking for silence, and the entire hall fell still. On the table, the silver pen rested on top of the paper that would make Dorotheia, his daughter, the official heiress of the Flor du Vale Farm. It was the day of her 20th birthday, the day the family's great-grandmother had determined in her will as the date when the first daughter of the house would take over the lands. It was at that moment that Zulide entered the hall, her face wet with tears, holding a letter crumpled from being read and reread so many times. "Don't sign it, Norberto," she said, her voice breaking in the middle of the sentence. "This letter proves that Dorotheia is not our daughter by blood." The silence that fell over the hall was greater than any shout. Dorotheia looked at her parents, then at the pen lying still on the paper, as if that small object alone could decide who she was. And kilometers away, without knowing anything at all, a young woman with calloused hands was finishing another day of harvest, far from imagining that the blood running in her veins was worth more than any land deed. To understand how two lives were switched in a single night, and how the truth took 20 years to find its way back, we need to go back to the beginning. Stay with me, because this story is going to squeeze your heart in a good way. The village of the Alps had no real hospital, only a small health post with 2 rooms and a generator that failed whenever the rain grew heavier. And that night, the rain did not just grow heavier, it poured down. It was on one of those nights, with the sky torn by lightning and the wind ripping tiles from the poorest shacks, that 2 women gave birth only a few minutes apart. In one of the rooms, Zuleide Andrade Becerra, wife of the farmer Norberto, had been moaning in pain for hours, surrounded by the village midwife, Donna Arcilia, a woman with firm hands and more than 30 years of experience. In the room next door, Amancha, a humble seamstress, married to the farmhand, Gennaro, was also in labor, alone, because there was no doctor available for both at the same time, and Donna Arcilia had to run from one side to the other. When the generator failed for the second time, the light in the health post went out completely. It was in the dark, with a handheld lantern trembling between tired fingers, that Donna Arcilia switched the identification bracelets of the 2 newborns. A mistake of seconds, a hurried gesture on an impossible night, and 2 entire lives changed places forever. Zulid received in her arms a chubby little girl with dark eyes and a strong cry, and she named her Dorotheia, the name she had already chosen months before. Amasia received a small, delicate girl with fair skin and a weak cry. Almasasigan decided to call her Anair, in honor of her own grandmother. Neither of the 2 mothers knew she was going home with the other woman's daughter. Dorotheia grew up surrounded by comfort on the Flor du Vale Farm. She had a private teacher, well-cut clothes, and a room with a window facing the pastures where Norberto's cattle grazed. But from an early age, she carried an uneasiness that no one could explain. She did not like staying still in the halls of the big house. She preferred the stables, the muddy boots, the smell of wet earth after the rain. Norberto, without understanding why, sometimes felt a strange distance between them, as if something was missing there, a connection he could not name, but that hurt quietly. Anair grew up on the other side of the village, in the simple house of Amancia and Gennaro, among scraps of fabric and the constant noise of the sewing machine. Her childhood was one of early work, of studying at night after helping her mother with the orders, of dreams kept in a notebook hidden under the mattress. But it was also a childhood full of warmth, of stories told by candlelight, of a father who, even tired from working other people's land, never failed to ask how his daughter's day had been. "One day I'm going to study in a real school," Mother Anair would say, as a little girl, looking at her worn notebooks, "and I'm going to make you proud." Amance would smile and always answer with the same words, "You already make me proud, every day, my daughter. This here," and she would point to her chest, "isn't learned in any school." Meanwhile, on the Flor du Vale farm, Zulite loved Dorotheia with all a mother's strength, but she kept, without ever telling anyone, a silent strangeness she could not explain. Sometimes she looked at her daughter and felt that something of herself was missing there. A feature, a manner, something she did not know how to name. Donna Arcilia, the midwife, moved away from the village 2 years after that stormy night, taking with her the weight of a secret she had carried alone for far too long. 18 years passed. Anair, already a young woman, worked in the seasonal harvests to help with the household bills. Since Anaisia's sewing orders had decreased with age and her mother's slower hands. It was in this way that, one morning during the coffee harvest, she set foot for the first time on the lands of the Flor Vale Farm, hired as a day laborer for the season. Norberto, who made a point of knowing by name everyone who worked on his lands, approached her at the end of the first day. "What's your name, young lady?" "Anaik, Sir Norberto," she answered, wiping her hands on her apron. "Daughter of Genario, the one who used to work at the dam long ago." Norberto felt something he could not explain. A strange warmth in his chest, almost a recognition. Like when you hear a forgotten song and cannot remember its name. He paid no attention to it at the time, but he returned to look for her in the following days, always with some excuse or other, always walking away from her with that uncomfortable feeling of familiarity he could not name. Dorotheia, who was also helping organize the harvest that year, noticed Anair for a very different reason. The birthmark in the shape of a small flower at the base of the neck, on the left side. It was identical, line for line, to the mark that Dorotheia herself carried in the same place, the one Zulite always said was the family mark. "It came straight from your great-grandmother." "How strange," Dorotheia remarked to herself, touching her own neck. Without realizing it, this can't be a coincidence. She kept the observation to herself, finding it amusing, without imagining how much that small detail carried. Meanwhile, in a distant village, Donna Arcilia, already with her health weakened by the years, could no longer sleep properly. The memory of that stormy night returned every time she closed her eyes. The generator going out, the lantern trembling, the 2 bracelets switched from hand to hand in seconds of haste and exhaustion. "I need to set this right before it's too late," she said one day to the niece who cared for her. "I've carried this weight for far too long." It was then that Donna Arcilia wrote a long letter, telling every detail of that early morning. The names of the 2 mothers, the exact time of the births, the failure of the generator, the switching of the bracelets. She addressed the letter to Dr. the lawyer of the Bezerra family for decades, a man of trust and discretion, asking him to decide, with wisdom, what to do with that truth. The letter took days to arrive, crossing dirt roads and small towns, until it finally came to rest on Dr. Osvaldo's desk, a few days before the date set for the signature that would officially make Dorotheia the sole heiress of the Flor Vale Farm, as determined by the will of the family's great-grandmother 3 generations earlier. Dr. Osvaldo read the letter twice, felt the weight of every word, and knew he could not keep it to himself. Dr. Osvaldo sought out Norberto and Zulide 2 days before the ceremony, and read Donna Arcelia's letter aloud to the couple in the farm as a living room. Zulide raised her hands to her face, and Norberto remained silent for so long that the clock on the wall seemed to tick more slowly. "This explains so much," Zulide said at last, her voice thick. "The way she is with the land, with the animals. I always felt something was missing, and God forgive me for having felt that about my own daughter." "She is your daughter," Dr. Osvaldo answered firmly. "She was raised by you, loved by you. That does not change with a letter, but the truth also deserves to be known, and the young woman out there deserves to know who she is." The 3 of them decided to verify the story carefully before any hasty decision. The family doctor, Dr. Herculano, compared the birthmarks of the 2 young women and confirmed what was already clear to the eye: the exact same shape, the same place, a trait that, according to the family's old records, had been repeating for generations on Zulide's maternal side. Added to the times recorded in the old health post book, which Dr. Osvaldo managed to locate, the proof became undeniable. On the day of the ceremony, instead of signing any paper, Norberto asked that Amancia, Genario, and Anair be invited to the farm. It was an invitation made with care, without hurry, delivered by Dr. Osvaldo himself, who explained the situation to Amancia, before anything else, giving her and her daughter time to take in that enormous news. When Anair entered the hall of the Flor du Vale Farm for the first time as a guest, and not as a day laborer, she found Zoulaide already standing, her eyes full of tears. "I didn't come here to take anything from you," Anair said, her voice trembling. "Amancia is my mother. She always will be." "I know, my daughter," Zoulaide answered, approaching slowly. "And Dorotheia will always be my daughter too, no matter what any paper says. But that doesn't mean there isn't a place for you as well. My heart is bigger than I thought it was." Dorotheia, who was watching everything from a corner of the hall, felt the weight of the revelation in a different way. For a moment, she feared losing her father, her mother, the surname. The whole story, she had always believed, was hers. But it was Norberto who approached her first, holding his daughter's face between his hands. "You are my daughter," he said, with a certainty that left no room for doubt. "I saw you born, even without knowing the whole truth. I raised you. I taught you to ride a horse. I cried when you had a high fever at 4 years old, and none of that is going to stop having happened. No blood erases that it was Genario, the farmhand, humble and a man of few words, who summed up the feeling of everyone in that room. We don't choose the belly we are born from," he said, looking at the two young women, "but we choose, every day, to love the ones who raise us, including Amancia and Genario, for a long conversation about the great-grandmother's will, which determined that the first daughter of the house would inherit the lands. Instead of choosing between the two, he decided to revise his own will, breaking a tradition that had become too rigid to fit the truth life had presented. The place of heiress will not belong to only one," he declared in front of Dr. Osvaldo. "It will belong to both, because both were born on the same night, under the same roof, and both deserve to harvest what this land has to give." Anair remained close to Amancia and Genario, who continued living in the simple house where they had always lived, now visited frequently by the daughter of blood they had discovered late, but whom they had never stopped loving as they always had. Ranulfo, the young man who had worked for years caring for the farm's horses and who had always admired Anair in silence since the harvest days, finally found the courage to declare himself, and a year later the two were married in a simple ceremony under the ipa trees of the village, with Norberto and Zoulaide sitting in the front row, beside Amancia and Genario as one single family. Dorotheia kept forever the affection of a daughter for Zoulaide and Norberto, and she found in the sister that life had given her through a storm's mistake a friendship that no land deed could ever have guaranteed. This story makes us think about a question that seems simple, but is not. What truly defines who is whose child? If it were only blood, a test, a birthmark, a hospital bracelet would be enough. But life showed, in these two families, that there is something stronger than any biological proof. The love built day after day, in the nights of fever, in the scoldings given out of care, in the hands that teach how to sew or how to ride a horse, in the embrace offered without asking for anything in return. Norberto and Zoulaide did not lose a daughter when the truth came to light. They gained two. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of this story. That true family is not always the one genetics chooses, but the one we choose every day to love. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below saying which moment moved you the most. And if you are not yet part of our family here on the channel, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and come with me for the next stories. Here we tell stories of simple people, of pain, of overcoming, and above all of love that cannot be explained by blood alone. A hug, and until the next story.